Part 1. Was 17 years old when he learned what it felt like to be the weakest person in a room full of aliens who could kill him without trying. The Galactic Academy sat on a moon called 3, a place with thin air and purple skis and buildings made of metal that hummed when you touched it. Students came from 40 different species to learn together, to train together, and to prepare for service in the Galactic Defense Fleet. It was supposed to be an honor. Earth had only been part of the galactic community for 12 years and was one of the first humans ever accepted into the Academy's combat program. His mother had cried when he left. His father had shaken his hand and told him to make humanity proud. His grandfather, an old man with rough hands and calm eyes, had simply bowed to him in the traditional way and said nothing at all. Now stood in the back corner of Combat Hall 7, wearing the standard gray training uniform that hung loose on his frame, and watched his classmates warm up for the morning session. There were 15 students in advanced martial theory, was the only human. Directly in front of him, a warrior named Ash stretched his 4 arms in slow circles. Each arm was as thick as thigh. They were tall and covered in plates of natural armor, with mandibles that could crush bone and reflexes twice as fast as any human. Ash had won every sparring match this semester. He had never even been knocked down. To the left, 3 students sat together on a bench that groaned under their weight. Looked almost like humans at first glance, but their bodies were dense with muscle fiber that made them incredibly strong and nearly impossible to move. The smallest of them weighed 400 pounds. When they walked, the floor shook. Near the windows, a student named polished her forearm guards. They had evolved exoskeletons that could harden on impact, turning their entire bodies into natural armor. Their joints were flexible, but the rest of them was like trying to punch a wall. Had once taken a full-strength hit from a without flinching. And then there was soft skin, 1 heart, 2 arms. No claws, no armor, no venom glands, no redundant organs. Just a human body that bruised easily and healed slowly and felt pain exactly the way nature intended. The door at the front of the hall slid open, and Commander La walked in. She was a species known for their speed and their sharp minds. Her body was lean and angular, covered in fine scales that shifted color when she moved. She had been a soldier for 40 years and a teacher for 20 more. Her eyes, yellow and unblinking, swept across the room and found in his corner. She did not smile. She never smiled at him. "Today we continue grappling fundamentals," she announced. "Pair up by Sci's class. We will drill takedowns for the first hour." Felt his stomach tighten. Sci's class pairing meant he would be matched with whoever was closest to his weight, which was usually. The girl was only slightly heavier than him, but her exoskeleton made the comparison meaningless. Fighting her was like wrestling a statue. But was already walking toward a student on the other side of the room. That left standing alone, looking around for a partner, until a shadow fell over him. "Needs a partner," Ash said. His voice was deep and rumbling, and his mandibles clicked with amusement. "I will help the little human practice." The other students made that chittering sound that passed for laughter among their species. Knew he should say something, should stand up for himself, but what was there to say? Ash was right. He was soft. He was small. He was everything the thought humans were. "Find an appropriate match, Ash," Commander La said without looking up from her tablet. "Partner with." Was alike the commander, which meant she was fast and precise, but not particularly strong. It was as close to a fair match as ever got in this class. He walked over to her and bowed slightly, a habit his grandfather had drilled into him since childhood. Tilted her head. "Why do you do that?" "Do what?" "Bend forward. Every time we spar, you bend forward first." Straightened up. "It's a sign of respect. In human martial arts, you bow to your partner before training." Blinked her large eyes slowly. "Human martial arts," she repeated, as if the words tasted strange. "I did not know humans had martial arts." "We have several hundred of them, actually." She stared at him for a moment, then made a sound that might have been a laugh. "That is a good joke. Several hundred. As if humans needed fighting systems when you have no natural weapons at all." Said nothing. He just settled into his stance and waited for the drill to begin. The next hour was exactly like every other training session had endured at the academy. Commander Law demonstrated a takedown technique designed for beings with 4 limbs and flexible spines, tried to adapt it to his human body, countered easily with her superior speed, hit the mat again and again, the impact padding doing little to soften the repeated falls. By the end of the session, his shoulders ached, his hip was bruised, and he had successfully completed exactly 0 takedowns. Adequate effort, Commander Law said as the class gathered their things. Remain behind. The other students filed out, a few of them glancing at with expressions ranging from pity to contempt. Ash clicked his mandibles again as he passed. A sound had learned meant something like amusement mixed with dismissal. When the hall was empty, Commander Law approached him. Up close, she was terrifying in the way all were terrifying, all sharp angles and coiled speed waiting to explode. You have been in my class for 6 months, she said. In that time, you have won exactly 2 sparring matches, both against first-year students who were half your size. Your technique scores are the lowest in the program. Your physical assessments are barely passing. Kept his eyes forward. Yes, Commander. I have taught students from 30 different species. I have never had one perform as poorly as you. She paused, her yellow eyes studying him. And yet you keep coming back, you keep trying. Why? It was a good question. Had asked himself the same thing many times, usually while lying on his back and staring at the ceiling after another failed bout. The answer was complicated. Part of it was pride. He was the first human in the combat program, and if he quit, he would prove everyone right about his species. Part of it was stubbornness. His grandfather had taught him that mastery came from patience, from endless repetition, from getting knocked down and standing up again. But mostly it was something he couldn't explain to Commander Law. Something about a promise he had made to the Earth military before leaving for the academy. Something about keeping secrets that weren't his to share. I want to improve, he said simply. I want to be better. The commander was silent for a long moment. Then she made a small sound, almost like a sigh, though wasn't sure actually sighed. The semester final examination is in 2 weeks, she said. Full contact qualification bouts, judged by observers from the Galactic Defense Council. Certification levels will be assigned based on performance. Do you understand what that means? Yes, Commander. It means you will fight opponents who will not hold back, opponents who have claws and armor and venom. If you are injured, it will be your own responsibility. She paused. You may withdraw from the examination without penalty. Given your performance this semester, no one would blame you. Thought about his grandfather's dojo back on Earth, the smell of old wood and sweat, the sound of bare feet on worn mats. He thought about the first time he had earned a new belt, the way his grandfather had tied it around his waist without ceremony, and then immediately knocked him down to show him how much he still had to learn. He thought about the promise he had made to keep humanity's secrets, to let the galaxy underestimate his species for just a little longer. I'll compete, he said. Commander Law studied him with those unblinking yellow eyes. Very well. Report to the examination hall at dawn on assessment day. And, yes, Commander. Try not to embarrass yourself too badly. Earth is watching. She turned and walked away, her scales shifting through shades of gray as she moved. Watched her go, then slowly gathered his things and headed for the door. In the hallway outside, a group of students were waiting. Ash stood at the front, his 4 arms crossed over his armored chest. "Thee is going to compete," he said, and the chittering laughter started again. "This will be entertaining. I hope they pair me with you, little human. I will try to leave enough of you intact for the medical bay to repair." Bowed slightly, the way his grandfather had taught him, and walked past without a word. 2 weeks. That was how long he had before the examination. 2 weeks of training, of drilling, of lying on his back and staring at the ceiling. 2 weeks of letting his classmates believe he was exactly what they thought he was. After that, everything would change. He just hoped he was ready for what came next. Part 2. The examination hall was the largest space in the Galactic Academy, a circular arena surrounded by tiered seating that could hold 3,000 observers. The floor was covered in impact-absorbing mats divided into 8 competition areas, each one marked with the symbols of different combat disciplines. Holographic displays hung above each area, ready to show match statistics and certification results. Arrived at dawn, as Commander Law had ordered. The hall was already filling with students from every combat class in the academy, hundreds of beings from dozens of species, all preparing for the most important test of their training. The air smelled like anticipation and fear and the strange chemical tang of alien sweat. He found his assigned area, mat number 6, and began his warm-up routine. It was the same routine he had practiced every morning since he was 4 years old, a series of stretches and movements that his grandfather had taught him in their small dojo in Osaka. The movements looked simple, almost lazy, nothing like the aggressive displays happening on the mats around him. Ash was 3 areas over, doing practice strikes that sent shockwaves through the air. The students were lifting weights that couldn't have moved with a truck. Though was sparring with another student, her exoskeleton hardening and softening as she blocked and countered. And was just stretching, breathing, centering himself the way his grandfather had taught him. "The human showed up," someone said nearby. "I thought for sure he would withdraw. Probably wants to get his minimum certification. Just needs to survive one bout without permanent injury." With those matchups, good luck. I heard they're pairing across size classes for the finals. Ignored the voices. He focused on his breathing, on the feeling of his muscles loosening, on the calm place in his mind where everything else faded away. The observation platform at the top of the hall began to fill with officials. Recognized the uniforms of the Galactic Defense Council, the organization that certified combat specialists for military service across the galaxy. There were observers from at least 20 different species up there, all of them carrying tablets and speaking in low voices. One of them caught his attention. She was ancient by the look of her, with an exoskeleton that had faded to pale gray with age. She wore the insignia of a general, and when she moved, the other observers stepped aside. Even from across the hall, could feel the weight of her presence. She was watching him. Her compound eyes, dozens of lenses working together, were fixed on the human boy doing his strange, simple stretches on mat number 6. "Attention all participants," a voice announced over the hall's speakers. "The examination will begin in 10 minutes. Report to your assigned mats for initial qualification rounds. Match pairings have been randomized by the Defense Council. Good fortune to all." Finished his warm-up and stood quietly, waiting. Around him, other students were doing final preparations, adjusting their armor, checking their claws, testing their venom glands. They were clacking their mandibles in what had learned was a pre-combat ritual. They were stomping their feet, shaking the floor with each impact. The holographic display above mat 6 flickered to life. 2 names appeared, along with species identification and combat statistics. Bout 1, Human vs. Ash. The hall went quiet around mat 6. Then the laughter started. Ash emerged from the crowd, all 4 arms spread wide, his mandibles clicking with amusement. He was a full 2 feet taller than and at least 200 pounds heavier, not counting the natural armor that covered most of his body. "At last," Ash said, "the universe has a sense of humor. I get to crush thee in front of everyone." More laughter. Someone in the crowd called out something in a language didn't understand, but the tone was clear enough. They were making bets on how quickly he would fall. Stepped onto the mat and bowed. Ash tilted his head, confused by the gesture, then settled into his fighting stance. 4 arms raised, mandibles spread, weight distributed for maximum stability. Commander Lay approached the edge of the mat. "This is a full contact qualification bout," she announced. "The match ends when one fighter submits, is rendered unconscious, or is unable to continue. Lethal force is prohibited, but serious injury is acceptable. Do both fighters understand?" "Yes, Commander," Ash rumbled. "Yes, Commander," said quietly. She raised her hand. The hall fell silent. Even the other matches seemed to pause as everyone turned to watch the human face the champion. Her hand dropped. Begin. Ash moved first, exactly as knew he would. They were aggressive fighters, trained to overwhelm opponents with their multiple limbs and superior strength. Ash lunged forward, all four arms extended, reaching for in a grappling technique that had pinned dozens of opponents. It was fast. By galactic standards, it was very fast. But had been training since he was 4 years old. His grandfather had spent 13 years teaching him to see attacks before they happened, to read the shift of weight, the tension of muscle, the intention in an opponent's eyes. And he had spent 6 months watching Ash fight, learning his patterns, memorizing his habits. Wasn't where Ash expected him to be. He had already moved, not backward like a retreating prey animal, but forward and to the side, rotating his body in a motion so smooth it looked choreographed. His right hand shot out, fingers finding the nerve cluster beneath Ash's primary shoulder, a spot where the natural armor was thin and the nerves were clustered close to the surface. Ash's right arms went limp. Before they could react, his hip made contact with Ash's center of mass. It was basic physics, the kind humans had been perfecting for thousands of years. Used his opponent's momentum against him, adding a small rotation, turning Ash's forward lunge into an uncontrolled spin. The throw was called Owen the language of his ancestors. It meant major hip throw. His grandfather had made him practice it 10,000 times before allowing him to use it in sparring. Ash, all 300 pounds of warrior, left the ground entirely. He hung in the air for 1 full second, mandibles clicking in confusion, eyes wide with shock. Then he hit the mat with an impact that made the holographic displays flicker. The impact sensors registered the force of the landing. Numbers appeared on the display above the mat, numbers that made the observers murmur in surprise. Ash lay on his back, struggling to breathe. The nerve strike had temporarily paralyzed his right side, and the fall had knocked the wind from his lungs. He tried to rise, but his arms wouldn't cooperate. Stood over him, calm and still, waiting. "Yield," he said quietly. "Please." Ash's eyes found his. For a long moment they stared at each other. Then, slowly, painfully, they slapped the mat with his one working hand. "Match," Commander Law announced, her voice strange and uncertain. "Wins by submission." The hall was completely silent. No one laughed. No one cheered. They simply stared, trying to understand what they had just seen. Bowed to his fallen opponent, then stepped back to the edge of the mat. He could feel every eye in the arena on him, thousands of beings who had just watched the weakest student in the combat program defeat the strongest in less than 5 seconds. The ancient general leaned forward in her observation seat, her compound eyes fixed on with an intensity that made the air feel heavy. A new matchup appeared on the holographic display above Mat 6. Bout 2, human versus. The who stepped onto the mat was the largest of the 3 in the combat program, a mountain of dense muscle that weighed nearly 500 pounds. He looked at with something that wasn't quite fear, but wasn't contempt either. "Begin," Commander Law said. Didn't lunge like Ash had. He was more cautious, more careful, approaching slowly with his arms raised to protect his face and body. They were by nature trained to close distance and use their overwhelming weight to pin opponents. Let him approach. He watched this feat, the way he shifted his weight, the subtle tells that revealed his intentions. When reached for him wasn't there either. But this time he didn't throw. Instead, he flowed around the grab like water around a stone, his hands finding wrist and elbow. He applied pressure in a very specific way, a technique called a joint lock, exploiting the one weakness that all bipedal beings shared. Their joints only bent in certain directions. Was strong, incredibly strong. But strength didn't matter when the alternative was a dislocated elbow. He dropped to one knee, then the other, his face twisting with pain as maintained the lock. "Yield," said again. Slapped the mat with his free hand. The third opponent was the one with the reactive exoskeleton. She approached the mat with her armor already hardening, preparing for the strikes she expected to throw. but didn't strike her armor. He didn't try to punch through the shell that covered her body. Instead, he moved like smoke, finding the gaps at her joints, the spaces where her exoskeleton couldn't protect her. His fingers pressed nerve points that made her limbs go weak. His feet swept her legs from under her before her armor could adjust. She was on the mat in 3 seconds, unable to rise, her exoskeleton useless against an attack that didn't try to break through it. The fourth opponent was the fastest species in the sector. He came at with blinding speed, strikes and kicks that moved almost too fast to see. Didn't try to match his speed. He didn't need to. His grandfather had taught him that speed meant nothing if your opponent knew where you were going to be. Every technique, no matter how fast, followed predictable lines. Every attack had a rhythm, a pattern, a destination. Moved to the destination before they arrived. He was already there, waiting, when his opponent's fist reached where his face should have been. His counter came from an angle they didn't expect, a simple push that redirected the alien's own momentum into an uncontrolled stumble. The hit the mat hard and had him in a hold before he could recover. 4 opponents, 4 victories, none of them lasting more than 5 seconds. The silence in the hall was absolute. Thousands of beings, students and instructors and observers, all staring at the human boy who had just done something impossible. Commander La stood at the edge of mat 6, her scales shifting through colors that had never seen before. Her yellow eyes were wide, her body utterly still. "What," she said slowly, "was that?" Looked at her, then at the observation platform where the ancient general was rising from her seat, and knew that the time for secrets was over. Part 3. The ancient general descended from the observation platform, and the crowd parted before her like water before a ship. She was old, older than anyone had ever seen, her exoskeleton faded to the gray of weathered stone. But she moved with a grace that spoke of decades of combat experience, and when she reached the edge of mat 6, even Commander La stepped aside. "Human," the general said. Her voice was low and rough, the sound of someone who had given orders on battlefields across the galaxy. "Come here." Walked to her and bowed, the same bow he had given to every opponent before their bout. The general's compound eyes studied him, dozens of lenses working together to see things that normal eyes could not. "What is your name, child?" "General." She repeated it slowly, as if tasting the words. "You have trained at this academy for 6 months. In that time, you have lost nearly every sparring match. You have scored at the bottom of every physical assessment. Your instructors believed you were the weakest student in the program." "Yes, General." "And yet you just defeated 4 opponents in less than 30 seconds total, opponents who should have been able to crush you without effort." Her eyes narrowed. "Explain." Felt the weight of every stare in the hall pressing down on him. He thought about the Earth military, the serious woman who had briefed him before he left for the academy. She had told him to keep humanity's secrets, to let the galaxy continue underestimating his species for as long as possible. But standing there, surrounded by beings who had mocked him for months, made a different choice. Some secrets needed to be told. "My species has no natural weapons," he said. "No claws, no venom, no armor. We are soft and slow and we break easily, so we learn to compensate." "Compensate how?" "By studying combat, not as a set of instincts or natural abilities, but as a science. We analyzed leverage and anatomy and the physics of force. We developed systems for fighting opponents who were stronger, faster, and better armed than we were." Paused. "We call them martial arts. I have been training in them since I was 4 years old." The general was silent for a moment. Around her, the other observers were exchanging glances, speaking in low voices. "Martial arts," she repeated. "And how many of these systems does your species have?" "Several hundred formalized styles, thousands of variants, techniques developed over 10,000 years of human history." The murmuring in the hall grew louder. Someone laughed nervously, as if waiting for the punchline of a joke. "That's impossible," Commander La said. Her scales had shifted to a dark red, a color had learned meant disbelief. "No species develops that many combat systems. There would be no need." Humans fight each other, said simply. We always have. Different cultures developed different methods. Different weapons created different responses. We have systems for fighting with swords and spears and bare hands. We have systems for fighting in armor and without armor, on land and in water, standing and on the ground. He met the commander's yellow eyes. We have spent our entire existence learning how to hurt each other. It made us very good at hurting everything else. The ancient general made a sound that might have been a laugh. 10,000 years, she said. 10,000 years of your species killing each other, and you turned it into an art form. Yes, General. Show me, she gestured to the mat. Show me what 10,000 years of human violence looks like. Hesitated. With respect, General, I don't think that would be appropriate. I am not asking you to fight me, child. I am asking you to demonstrate. Choose any technique from any system you know. Show me what humans have learned. Thought for a moment, then nodded. He walked to the center of the mat and stood still, centering himself the way his grandfather had taught him. The hall fell silent again, every eye watching the small human boy standing alone on the competition floor. He began with the most basic kata from his grandfather's style, a sequence of movements that every beginner learned in their first week of training. Blocks and strikes and kicks, flowing together in a pattern that had been refined over hundreds of years. It looked simple, almost gentle, nothing like the aggressive displays the other species favored. But as he moved, something changed in the quality of the air. The strikes that looked lazy carried the potential for devastating impact. The blocks that seemed soft could redirect the force of a charging opponent. The footwork that appeared random created angles of attack that were impossible to defend. Finished the basic kata and moved into more advanced forms. Judo throws that used an opponent's strength against them. Aikido that could control without damaging. Karate strikes designed to break bone and rupture organs. Submissions that could render any enemy helpless regardless of their size or strength. He showed them Tai, the art of 8 limbs, elbows and knees and shins turned into weapons. He showed them wrestling, the oldest combat sport on Earth, the foundation of grappling that humans had practiced since before they had written language. He showed them boxing, the sweet science, hands moving faster than thought to find the gaps in any defense. And then he showed them the dirty techniques, the eye gouges and throat strikes and groin kicks that no sport allowed. The holds that broke joints slowly and painfully. The pressure point attacks that could paralyze or kill with a single touch. When he finished, he was breathing hard, sweat dripping from his forehead. He turned to face the general and bowed. The hall was absolutely silent. That, the general said slowly, was the most terrifying thing I have ever witnessed. It's just training, General. Basic techniques that any human martial artist learns. Basic. She made that sound again, the one that might have been a laugh. A species with no natural weapons developed systems that can defeat enemies with 4 arms and natural armor. Systems that turn your opponent's strength into a weakness. Systems that work against any anatomy, any size, any speed. Her compound eyes studied him with new intensity. How did you hide this for 6 months? Thought about the question. It wasn't hard. Everyone expected me to be weak, so that's what they saw. They never considered that I might be choosing not to win. Why? Why hide something like this? Because Earth asked me to. We've only been part of the galactic community for 12 years. We're still trying to find our place. And some people thought it would be better if the galaxy continued to underestimate us for a while longer. Commander La stepped forward, her scales shifting through colors that couldn't interpret. The entire semester, every sparring match, every drill, every assessment, you could have won all of them. Probably not all of them, said, but most, yes. Why are you revealing this now? Considered the question carefully. He thought about his classmates, who were staring at him with expressions he had never seen before. Not contempt or pity, but something that might have been respect. He thought about his grandfather, who had always said that the best fighters never needed to fight at all, but that sometimes circumstances required you to show what you were capable of. Because hiding isn't the same as peace, he said finally. Earth wanted to keep our abilities secret because we were afraid of how the galaxy would react, but fear isn't a foundation for trust. If humanity is going to be part of the galactic community, we need to be honest about who we are and what we can do. The ancient general was silent for a long moment. Then she turned to the observation platform and spoke in a voice that carried across the entire hall. This student has demonstrated mastery exceeding our highest certification standards. I am recommending immediate advancement to Black Belt classification, the highest certification level in the galactic combat system. She paused. I am also recommending that the Defense Council establish formal contact with Earth's martial traditions for evaluation and potential integration into galactic combat doctrine. The murmuring in the hall erupted into open conversation. Could hear fragments of discussion in a dozen languages, beings debating what they had just witnessed and what it meant for the galaxy's understanding of humanity. The general turned back to him. You have been holding back all semester, playing the fool while your classmates mocked you. That requires a certain kind of strength that has nothing to do with physical ability. My grandfather taught me that the strongest warriors never need to prove their strength. Fighting to show off is weakness. Fighting to protect is strength. Your grandfather sounds like a wise man. He was the best teacher I ever had. The general nodded slowly. I have one more question for you. You showed us many techniques today, some for defense, some for control. But some of them were designed to kill, efficiently and without mercy. Her compound eyes fixed on his. Has humanity ever used these systems for war? Thought about the question. He thought about human history, the endless cycles of violence and conquest, the battlefields soaked in blood, the weapons that grew more terrible with each generation. He thought about Hiroshima and the trenches of the Somme and the countless wars that had shaped his species. Yes, he said, many times, humans have done terrible things to each other over the course of our history. The same systems that can protect can also destroy. The same skills that can save lives can take them. And does that concern you, that these abilities could be used for harm? Nodded. Every day. That's why my grandfather spent his life teaching discipline along with technique. That's why the traditions of martial arts include codes of honor and responsibility. The power to hurt someone is worthless without the wisdom to know when not to. The general studied him for a long time. Then, slowly, she extended one armored hand toward him. It was a human gesture, one that had taught some of his fellow students over the past 6 months. A handshake. Welcome to the Galactic Defense Council, she said. I think humanity has more to teach us than anyone realized. Took her hand and shook it firmly. Around them, the hall erupted into applause and cheering, dozens of species showing approval in their own ways. Ash and the other were clacking their mandibles, but the sound was different now, respectful rather than mocking. And they were stomping their feet in what had learned was a gesture of honor. Evelyn was nodding, her exoskeleton gleaming in the arena lights. Commander Lay approached him as the celebration continued. I owe you an apology, she said. I thought you were the worst student I had ever taught. I recommended that you withdraw from the examination. You were doing your job, Commander. You saw what I showed you. Yes, and that's what bothers me. Her yellow eyes studied him. You fooled me for 6 months. You made me believe something that wasn't true. That kind of deception requires skill that goes beyond combat. My grandfather had a saying about that. He said that the greatest victory is the battle that doesn't need to be fought. If my classmates had known what I could do, they would have tried to prove themselves against me. There would have been conflicts, injuries, damaged pride. By letting them underestimate me, I avoided all of that. Until today. Until today, agreed. Sometimes the truth needs to come out. Sometimes you need to show people what you're really capable of, not to prove something to them, but to build something real. Commander Law was quiet for a moment. Then, for the first time since had met her, she smiled. It was a strange expression on her angular face, but it was genuine. I look forward to learning from you. I think we all have much to learn from humanity. Bowed to her, the same bow he had given to every opponent, every sparring partner, every instructor who had ever helped him grow. Then he turned and walked off the mat, through the crowd of students who parted before him with new respect in their eyes. Ash was waiting at the edge of the arena. The warrior's 4 arms hung at his sides, and his mandibles were still. "You could have defeated me at any time," Ash said. "Any of those sparring matches over the past 6 months, you could have won." "Yes. Why didn't you?" "Thought about it. Because winning wasn't the point. The point was learning. Getting knocked down taught me how to get back up. Losing taught me humility. And watching all of you fight taught me how to beat you." Ash stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, the bowed, bending forward in an awkward imitation of the gesture had used at the start of every bout. "I misjudged you, human. I called you weak because I didn't understand your kind of strength." He straightened up. "I would be honored to train with you, to learn what humans know." Smiled and bowed in return. "I'd like that. We can start tomorrow if you want." "Tomorrow," Ash agreed. "And perhaps you can teach me that throw, the one that put me on my back." "Oh, major hip throw. It's actually pretty simple once you understand the physics." "Simple," Ash repeated, and made that chittering sound again. But this time it wasn't mockery, it was respect. Walked out of the examination hall and into the purple light of 3's afternoon. The thin air filled his lungs, and he looked up at the alien sky and thought about home. About his grandfather's dojo, the smell of old wood and sweat, the sound of feet on worn mats. He had come to the Galactic Academy as a representative of his species, carrying secrets that Earth wanted to keep hidden. He was leaving as something different, a bridge between worlds, a teacher as well as a student, a human who had shown the galaxy what 10,000 years of struggle and survival had created. His grandfather had been right, as always. The strongest warriors never needed to prove their strength, but sometimes, just sometimes, they needed to show what they were capable of. Not to intimidate, not to conquer, but to build something real. The weakest student in the combat program walked into the future with his head held high. He had earned his black belt. Now it was time to see what he could do with it.